This is CBC Winnipeg News.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Manitoba is reporting its first case of monkeypox. The news was announced today by the Deputy Chief Provincial Public Health Officer. The CBC's Andrew Wilds was at that news conference and brings us the details.
The province isn't identifying the individual, so we don't know the person's gender or age. It's also not clear where the case was reported. Dr. Atwell says the case came from outside Manitoba, but we don't know if that means another province or another country. Health officials say it's important to guard these details so that others will know it's okay to seek help.
We don't provide that information to anyone else for really any purpose at all. So we don't provide identifiers. Just like today, it's high level. That's how we're going to keep it.
Atwell says there's always a possibility that there are undetected infections right here in Manitoba. The province is concentrating its education efforts to those who are most at risk.
In line with international trends, the majority of confirmed cases in Canada reported intimate sexual contact with other men. The risk to the general public remains low, but it is important for everyone to be aware of monkeypox, so those that are at risk can take steps to reduce their risk and seek care and get tested if they develop symptoms.
The vaccine is being offered to men who have sex with men and anyone who is a close contact to a confirmed case. As of Sunday, 168 doses of the monkeypox vaccine had been given. The province won't say how many doses it has, but Atwell says it's enough. Starting next week, the province will begin to offer the vaccines to walk-ins in Winnipeg. People can also book appointments online or by calling HealthLinks. Andrew Wiles, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Hand, foot, and mouth disease is sweeping through Manitoba daycares this summer. It is an extremely contagious virus that causes fever, cough, and blisters on the hands, feet, and mouth. It's not unusual to see it, but it's just happening in many, many cases right now. Early symptoms in young children include extra drooling and a runny nose. The Manitoba Child Care Association says despite extra cleaning of toys and surfaces, it's still spreading like wildfire. The group says a survey of members found nearly 70% of those who responded have seen at least 4 cases. So they're asking parents who suspect their child may not be feeling well to keep them home. Winnipeg City staff hope you will apply for one of the 100+ vacancies on advisory boards. Although some current members warn you might have to bring your patients. CBC's Sam Sampson explains.
Rachel Sandsregret has some honest advice for Winnipeggers applying to be on a city board.
Due to municipal processes and the bureaucracy, don't expect to go into a meeting and be like, my voice was heard and change is coming.
The city has 112 vacant citizen spots on 19 advisory boards. Now, those boards help make a variety of decisions, everything from which organization gets a gardening grant to the final say in tax assessments. City staff want to fill these positions by the end of the year. So far, they've received 44 applications.
One instance involved being dragged out almost to the perimeter when my destination was 5 minutes away from where I was picked up in Osborne Village.
Sandsregret warns city meetings can be slow, so she went another route to push for harsher rules for misbehaving cab drivers, publicly speaking before councillors.
I believe that our voice was heard because, unfortunately, 17 members of the Indigenous community and myself went to the mayor's chambers and had to go sit in there for 8 hours and recount and reshare our stories of the injustices that had happened.
But I've been there 10 years. It tends to be a battle with the civil service and with other councillors.
Say Fatale councillor Brian Mays says he's sympathetic to frustrated board members. He resigned from the Winnipeg Police Board in March, calling it dysfunctional. He's not sure of how it should interact with council. Plus, he was tired of the social media criticism the police board garnered.
Other boards, there's not the same sort of volume of criticism or combativeness at the hearings. So I think the police board's a bit different, and provincial appointees on there as well as city appointees. So I hope people wouldn't be scared off thinking, I'm just going to get trashed on Twitter or something.
Both say sitting on a city board is worth it for a cause you care about. But Sandsregret says the key is to question the process and make sure you speak up if you see anything moving too slowly. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Today, we mark the 80th anniversary of the Second World War's Operation Jubilee, better known as the Diap Raid. It is a somber milestone. That bloody battle against the Nazis in France lasted less than 10 hours. 900 Canadian soldiers died there. 1,900 were taken prisoner. The Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, the only battalion from Manitoba to take part in that raid, held a memorial ceremony last evening at Vimy Ridge Park to remember those who fought. The ceremony began at 8:30 p.m. local time. Factoring in the time change to England's shores, that would coincide with the time 80 years ago that 503 Manitobans set sail for France and that pending attack. The CBC's Emily Brass now with the story of a project that also aims to honor those who served.
It's in Hartney Cemetery, and there's a memorial.
This little album is how Gordon Newton remembers his uncle. Corporal Eldon Hatch was killed 80 years ago today during the Diap Raid. He and his sister Nora say he was a handsome man who sang in the choir and loved children.
We'd grab a hold and tease us and throw us in the air and hug us.
He was a very giving, caring person, very involved with people, and we loved him very much.
They remember their grandmother getting the news by telegram.
I was a little guy. I'm sure I cried.
Well, we all cried.
You know?
Yeah, we all cried.
I missed him like heck.
Their uncle's last known address was here on Lincoln Avenue in Winnipeg. It's one of hundreds of homes across Canada to be sent a postcard like this. A new exhibit aims to keep memories of Diep soldiers alive.
And we thought, well, if we can tie a serviceman who was killed overseas in 1942 to a current address, maybe that gives, the person at that address, a little bit of a pause on Friday to think about, who was that person?
Another postcard was sent to this home on Spence Street.
The room that I sleep in, that could have been his room.
Kathy Fossin wants to learn more about the fallen soldier who once lived in her house.
Chills. Just gives you chills and makes you appreciate what you have and what others sacrifice so you could have the freedoms that we actually have today.
Historians couldn't find a photo of Sergeant Nestor Parent, but they do have a picture of what his life was like and the horrible way it came to an end.
Parent left his Winnipeg home after his parents died and enlisted with Les Fusiliers Montréal. The regiment suffered some of the highest casualties at Diep. Witnesses saw Parent crawling on the beach where he was fatally shot by the Nazis. Gordon and Nora hope the stories remind Canadians of the horrors of war.
If you look at the news today, the actors changed, the positions changed, the issues changed, but we can't seem to learn to get along together.
We live in a wonderful country, and it was, and people sacrificed their lives to make it that way.
People like their beloved uncle, Eldon. Emily Brass, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Students across Canada are in Winnipeg this week to learn about human rights. Their goal? Learn from the past to make change for the future. The CBC's Lamia Abuzaid spoke to some of them.
It just hurts me because as a woman of color, to imagine someone just not allowing me in a space just because I'm brown.
Amaya Mahovich wants people to never forget what happened to Viola Desmond, arrested for sitting in the wrong section of a segregated theater. The 16-year-old is learning about human rights defenders through Rotary Club. Mahovich says these are the kind of conversations that were missing where she grew up in a small town in Alberta.
Where I'm from, everyone is not very progressive, not very open-minded. So I hope that going back, I can help inspire and educate others so that they can also take a stand against for social justice.
Mahovich is one of 17 students who traveled to Winnipeg to spend a week learning at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, focusing on the foundations of human rights, residential schools, the Rwandan genocide, and much more.
One question that really stood out to me was, where do we draw the line? Where do we draw the line between freedom of speech and freedom of religion? Where is that line? And that's something you really have to decide to yourself.
If you ever see a red dress hanging in a tree, or on the side of the highway or in a window in a store that seems out of place, that's what that represents.
They're learning about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls with their program director, Tamara Larson. She says this experience is a lot more than just a history lesson.
We teach them how to speak with respect, understand diversity. What does it mean to be inclusive? Understanding different cultures, looking at things through a different perspective, understanding that they have a voice and teaching them how to use that voice.
Akbar Imran is planning to turn these lessons into action in Kenora. His family moved there from Pakistan in 2017. The 15-year-old wants people to understand the connection between trauma and social issues.
Kenora is a city where there's this severe problem with addiction, alcoholism, drug abuse, and trafficking, actually. So with the knowledge I've gained about the genocide, I plan on making a documentary-style video targeted for Kenora people, sending them to high school students, sending them to high schools we have in Kenora and to multiple different businesses to have them presented.
Now, with a wider lens on human rights, the students are heading home ready to spark change in their communities. Lamia Abuzaid, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Winnipeg police have identified the man who died this week after he was assaulted in South Point Douglas. Officers were called to Higgins Avenue between Main and Austin Streets just after 3 a.m. Wednesday. There they found 40-year-old Brian Edward Anderson in front of a business. He had serious injuries and he died in the hospital. Police are asking anyone with information on Anderson or on what happened to contact the homicide unit. A Winnipeg mayoral candidate says the city is on its way to a dubious record, and he wants to change that. Kevin Klein says the city is on track to have 50 homicides this year, the most ever recorded. He says people don't feel safe in their homes. He also says they are frustrated by a slow police response when they call 911. Klein says part of the problem is police have to sit for hours with suspects when they're taken to hospital.
That is not an efficient use of resources. Everyone with a gun and a badge should be on the street and being utilized properly. That's how we start to address crime.
Klein says one of his ideas is to have sheriffs stationed in hospitals who could take custody of an injured suspect from a police officer. Klein is one of 14 people running to become Winnipeg's next mayor. Colorful fabric patterns that weave culture with creativity are hitting the shelves of a Winnipeg fabric store. Marshall Fabrics is commissioning Indigenous artists to create designs that will be carried in their stores. The first pattern rolled out this week, and as our Holly Carrick reports, the material is getting noticed.
For a lifelong sewer, it's a dream come true. Carrie Okamau's original design printed on bolts of fabric.
I need to see it to believe it because I'm still in a state of shock.
Okamau is the first artist to have her work printed on limited edition links of cotton at Marshall Fabrics. The Manitoba-raised designer blends both her Cree and Ojibwe roots. She's been sewing and beading powwow regalia for more than 20 years.
All of a sudden, my floral designs are being showcased by a fabric store that I love.
If you have it for a skirt, it's going to hang beautifully.
The Winnipeg-based fabric store rolled out the new line on Wednesday. Store manager Beth Cernick says she's already received orders from BC, Nova Scotia, and the United States.
Everybody really likes it. I mean, it's bright and it's colorful and it's happy and it's got the strawberries on it, which is very important.
Cernick says the shop has been looking to team up with artists like Okamau for years.
We do sell a lot of Indigenous prints in our store, but a lot of the companies who are making Indigenous prints are not using Indigenous artists. So I thought it was important that they started having representation in the fabrics that we're selling.
Every 6 months, the store plans to feature a new design by a different Indigenous artist. They're hoping to have the next batch of fabric in stock by the end of the year.
Tasha Adams was in Winnipeg on Thursday to check out the new designs.
I like the old school original prints of Cree and Ojibwe flowers. I like the strawberries on it. I like all the mixture of the colors in it. It reminds me very much of our culture.
Adams purchased some of the fabric to make woodland dancer regalia for her son.
Like 10 years ago when I made regalias with my mom, this wasn't anywhere in any store.
Okamal says it's important for Indigenous artists to be part of the process when it comes to showcasing their culture.
I feel really blessed to be part of that movement because it wasn't too long ago that our ancestors used to have to hide our practices.
Just 500 meters of each of the 6 colors will be printed. Work with 2 more artists is already underway, and the store is still looking for more. Holly Carrick, CBC News, Winnipeg.